Welcome to the FNO InsureTech podcast, a place where movers and shakers from all points within the insurance ecosystem gather and discuss all things InsureTech. We talk about how technology and innovation are affecting and driving change in the industry. Here are your hosts, Lee Boyd and Rob Beller.
Hey, podcast world. We're here with another edition of
FNO InsureTech.
The one, the only podcast, as my boss would say, the single source of truth.
Single source of truth.
In the InsureTech world.
Yeah.
Right here.
We're here over 200 episodes.
Over 200 episodes of giving you guys all the information you need about InsureTech, whether you want it or not.
And a little laugh along the way.
And is there a little laugh along the way?
I laugh at us.
Do you? Do you when you listen to us? Do you laugh
I think
at
a lot
us?
of people laugh at us, not with us, but at us.
At us.
Like, what a bunch of idiots.
Whatever it takes. That's part of being an entertainer.
I'm an entertainer.
We're entertainers.
We're news. We're entertainment news.
We
Maybe
are.
we'll change the name to like Entertainment News Tonight or
I
something.
have an idea. Why don't we change it to People Magazine?
That's a great one. I think that might be a hit. You're onto something.
Do you think that might catch on?
You're onto something.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And I don't think any other organization would have a problem with us calling ourselves that.
I don't think so.
Okay.
We'll just do it. We'll see what happens.
Okay.
It'll be weird that we're a podcast called Magazine. That might be confusing, but that's the least of our problems.
But that's okay. Our podcast is confusing, so it's a theme.
Yeah, it's a theme.
We're here, but we're not here to talk about that. We're changing our name to People Magazine.
No, we're not.
We're here to do a podcast.
Yeah, even though we interview fascinating people, and they oftentimes have a neat little story.
Yeah, like what's the story today?
Like today's story, we're interviewing a really interesting guy who's in the venture world, right? Kyle Beatty, managing director of AmFam Ventures. We're going to talk about that, but then we're going to get to talk about health and a little bit of his insight and why he's getting healthy and all those things.
Wait a minute. AmFam Ventures?
Again? Well, they're such a big deal.
They are.
And they're the nicest people.
They are.
They're a big deal. And in fact, I think I've heard the word AmFam Ventures, I bet 5 times in the last 2 weeks, unassociated with our podcast, because they're everywhere. They invest in fascinating things. They co-invest with fascinating groups. It's a unique business. Mm-hmm. And we get the privilege to talk to Kyle today about it.
They're a very deeply thoughtful organization. And when I met Kyle and had an opportunity to visit with him, I realized that this is the kind of guy we want on the podcast. And like you said, not just because of his approach and his thoughts on venture capital.
Yeah.
But also, he's an interesting cat.
Yeah, we're going to get to talk about longevity, living life.
We're going to talk. I mean, I listened to a longevity podcast.
Yeah.
And when I'm talking with him, the first time I met him, he says, "Oh, yeah, I listened to this particular podcast." So I knew that we had stuff in common. And I think you will agree with that, too, once you listen to the podcast.
I think so. I think he hits on a subject that will actually get you thinking. That there's one thing that gets talked about. Shocker, we already did the interview, but there's something really interesting that he talks about that could change your life, perhaps.
So with that in mind, we will stop our jibber jabbering.
No more jibber jabber.
And get right to our interview with Kyle Beatty, managing director at AmFam Ventures. So sometimes you are walking around a conference and you recognize somebody that you know who it is and you want to meet. And so you take a chance and you walk up to the guy and you say, "Hey, are you Kyle Beatty?" And he says, "Yes." And that's our guest today.
That's awesome.
And how we roped him into this. He tried to run off.
Run fast.
He did. And we'll talk about running. He tried, but I grabbed him. And so today we have with us a VC who's been at it for a long time and with one of the premier VCs in InsureTech, Kyle Beatty, managing director at AmFam Ventures. Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome.
Thanks, guys. Happy to be here.
Where do you join us from today?
I am about an hour north of central Boston. So it's a little cold today.
Is it?
What city? I'm
actually
like
just
Salem?
over the border in New Hampshire.
Oh.
So I live in a village called Amherst.
Oh, okay. There's a school there. Anyways, welcome to our podcast. We're thrilled to have you. You are the third member of the AmFam Venture team who has who we've tricked into being on our podcast with us. So we really appreciate it. We've had Dan Reed and Caitlin Johnson. You don't see them in person very often, right?
We get together, so many times a year, but we're not all physically in the same office. We have a pretty distributed team, and we've grown quite a bit. We have a pretty large team now, and so we have folks that are on various parts of the East Coast, from kind of Philly to Boston, and then we have folks in the Midwest, and so we have quite a large distributed team. But we make a conscious effort to get together in person as much as we can. I think that's really important to make sure that our decisions are, as solid as they can be in terms of our investing.
But not so much in Madison in the winter.
That's a difficult choice, but it has to happen. But if we can find a warmer spot, that's definitely our preference.
That's right. Miami, somewhere nice.
Yeah. Exactly.
So let's talk let's level set first and give us a minute on who you work for and what do you do there?
Yeah. So American Family Ventures is a group that has evolved quite a bit over the last 10 to 12 years. We began investing specifically from American Family's balance sheet. It matured through multiple kind of different allocations of capital there, and now have the opportunity to work with a diverse syndicate of insurance companies in addition to American Family. And that gives us the ability to have coverage across, lots of different areas of the insurance landscape. So today we focus on investing predominantly at early stages, but we think about things across all aspects of the insurance value chain and all lines of business. So that might include healthcare, life, annuity, different parts of wealth management, or of course, any part of P&C. And in that, we consider things outside of the U.S. as well in highly developing markets like India or in Latin America. So we have a pretty wide purview these days in terms of what we focus on. And then we also look at things that are not necessarily core to insurance, but might be important to any large enterprise. So think of DevOps solutions or things that would relate to cloud infrastructure, data science, really anything that might fall under, for example, a large enterprise's IT budget. Those kinds of horizontal software and technology companies are very, very exciting to us as well. And so we tend to have an interest that's almost more like a generalist style investor, because it's the insurance touches so many different market segments. We have a pretty wide aperture.
Define early stage, your definition of early stage.
That can be really from a very early moment of inception of a company on through really probably the Series B round is the place where we would focus kind of our last substantial area of investment. So think of it as practically seed through Series B as the best description.
That makes sense. And then what do you do there? What is your job there?
Well, so my focus is on making the best kind of investing decisions we can make, and be leading other members of our team toward the diligence and the support we need to provide to those portfolio companies post investment. So the majority of my attention is going toward that kind of deployment of the funds that we have, and then the kind of management of that portfolio through partnering with the startup founders over the life cycle of those businesses. So that will involve, serving those teams in a board capacity, in an advisory capacity, or if I can, provide any connections or strategic thoughts that are helpful to those companies' growth and journeys. And then in addition to that, we do spend quite a bit of time trying to work at the intersection of insurance, incumbents or insurance carriers that are in our network and the broader startup ecosystem. One of the things that we tend to try and always emphasize is it's not necessarily those companies that we invest in that we have a relationship with, but it's really the broader suite of insurance technology and adjacent companies that we interact with. And given that we have over a dozen people now in our team who are responsible for sourcing startup companies, it gives us the opportunity to talk with thousands of companies in a year.
Wow.
So we try and be a high value, kind of point of connection between anyone that has an interest in insurance related technology and those companies that are trying to advance, those software and data agendas. So we try and be a very high value kind of connector between those two spaces.
I wanted to ask you about that because that, I think, is a unique thing about AmFam Ventures is your involvement with really kind of competitors of sorts, natural competitors, other carriers. You guys are, although I don't exactly understand the relationship between you and AmFam. You were, as you said, you were born out of American Family Insurance. And how have you guys done that where you've been able to work cooperatively with companies that you might naturally compete with?
Philosophically, I think that there's two facets that are kind of most important for insurance companies to be able to have the ability to digitally transform and just get the most out of that process. And one is to have a high degree of awareness and access to the companies that one might partner with. So where is technology moving? What is the latest in terms of digital distribution, analytics I might use in underwriting, et cetera. And then the second would be, how do we prepare our teams to be most effective in implementing those solutions? So what's the best way to partner with an early stage company? How do we move toward implementation and operational deployment in a way that is effective and efficient? And so if you have, just a high degree of preparation and you have access, typically those two things together prepare one to be in an advantaged place, in terms of being able to, adopt, the new solutions that will move forward one's ability to grow and to do so profitably. So with that backdrop, what we seek to do is to create an ecosystem for our firm that gives us maximal access and allows us to be in the best kind of position to coach and curate connections. And so what we found is by having more relationships that represent more diverse segments of the insurance ecosystem, it improves those two things. It gives us more access and puts us in a better position to be a high value coach and connector. And so, that it's kind of a, rising tide rises all boats philosophy. And we found that to really, bear out to the benefit of any party we have a chance to work with formally or informally.
So you're kind of helping to lead the team to do it.
Yeah, I view it as, kind of part of my goal is to try and, in partnership with the other senior investors on our team to try and just, be able to deliver on our promise to maximize kind of financial return and to be able to just be a really high value partner to each of the founders that we're fortunate to work with. And so, daily, that's kind of what I wake up focused on. And in doing so, we try and make sure that there's kind of operational value that comes out of our network access as well. So if an insurance company that we're close with is looking for a specific type of technology, hopefully we know half a dozen or more companies that might be useful there. And if we can help accelerate the process of evaluation, we try and do that as well.
We've had many of your investments, of the companies that you've invested in, on our podcast, many of them. It's not just current ones, but the ones that have been realized are, they're like a who's who of InsureTechs. I'm going to say a couple of the names because it's entirely public. Hover, Branch. You guys were in Ring, I believe. Bold Penguin, One Inc. The list goes on. What do you attribute that batting average to?
So you mentioned many of those that are very specific and directly tied to insurance. I think one of the things I'm super proud of as a team that we achieve, I hope that we achieve consistently, is not only to be involved with a company like the ones that you mentioned, but to develop a point of view of what we think will be successful pretty early on in those companies' life cycles. So, many of the ones that you mentioned, we originally invested in the seed, and in some cases the Series A rounds, but developed conviction that those companies were positioned for success quite early. And I think that in a very specific vertical market like insurance, I think having subject matter expertise coming from that market is extremely important. And so I try and draw on my own background there, daily as I try and assess what the future landscape might look for the insurance industry. And we hire individuals into our team who bring different lenses, of the insurance market, from their backgrounds. And for those that are new to the industry, they, as part of our kind of daily environment inside our firm, they're responsible for developing deep expertise in certain segments. So I think it's the subject matter expertise that is insurance specific that has a very large amount to do with us, kind of feeling high confidence early in certain types of companies. In the other cases, and Hover, is an illustration of this, because Hover is very active in insurance claims resolution, but a lot of their business is in contracting, with construction. And so in other cases, we do seek to be the most, valued insurance, kind of organization that someone in an adjacent market might want to involve. And so if you're a prop tech company, or a fintech company like in lending, or wealth management, or small business related software, if someone is seeking engagement with the insurance industry, we try and put ourselves in a place where we can be, kind of short on that list, if not near the top of who they might want to reach out to involve a fund, in their kind of future fundraising efforts that has insurance expertise. And so the nature of that results in about kind of half of our investments being core insurance and about half being in these adjacent markets that have an intersect with the insurance industry.
Hover's a great example. And we encounter that all the time, where we'll have somebody on the podcast whose company is just that. They're primarily working in one thing, but they want to come into insurance, or they're adding value. Like I think of DroneBase, right? DroneBase is, they're huge in solar.
Yeah.
But also involved in the insurance vertical. So,
yeah, and Hover was great. I've been fortunate to work with, AJ and other members of the Hover team for several years. And I think, I didn't personally lead that initial investment decision. That was before I joined the firm, but have been a chance to be the point of interface with that team. And for me personally, I observed a lot of similarity to some of the Verisk businesses that I was close to when I was a member of Verisk Analytics. And companies like Xactware are good illustrations of businesses that have kind of exercised that intersection between construction, restoration, and insurance really, really effectively to produce kind of balanced revenues across more than one vertical market. And I think as we look toward investing, that's an attribute in startups that we really tend to get excited about. And that's partly because, it increases the overall market opportunity if there's, kind of more than one synergistic vertical that you can pursue. And it also, kind of buffers a little bit in terms of the sales cycle and speed to revenue development, because sometimes, selling into the insurance industry can be extremely effective, but take a little bit of time. And some other things like, selling to contractors might be a little quicker way to generate the early revenue that's very important to build momentum if you're an early stage company. So we tend to really get excited about businesses that play at an intersect of two or three spaces. And, Hover's a great example of that.
So talk a little bit about your time at VeriRisk. I do see that you were at VeriRisk for a little while on the insurance solutions side. How has that set you up for success in this current role as managing director at AmFam Ventures?
Yeah, I would say that there's a number of ways we could say. I was very fortunate at my time at VeriRisk to get exposure to some of the attributes that I've kind of learned, and that VeriRisk certainly learned experientially, that made for a really great data business, or a really great software business with a very deep moat. And so what I started to observe were, what were the things that created highly durable long-term revenue streams that had the potential for high profit margin, and kind of what was the attribute that created a very high market share opportunity. And those tended to be things that had tight interplays with the regulatory environment, tended to have proprietary data as a core component, tended to have certain ways of contracting with customers, which might result in customers sharing data that is aggregated and then resold out back into the market. But there were a number of facets that kind of produced a formula for a great analytic business, and so I was definitely a student of what those elements are. And I think the other thing that the experience from VeriRisk kind of taught me was it helped me really understand the claim and the underwriting workflows of insurance companies, and particularly on the casualty side as well as property. I'd spent a lot of time in property, in the past, because I have a catastrophe kind of modeling and catastrophe risk background, and spent quite a bit of time on property cat treaties when I was at Willis, but had spent less time in casualty. And so, seeing that firsthand, whether it be through the core ISO business and what makes ISO itself so unique, or the different, kind of claim, fraud, analytics, et cetera, that VeriRisk has, as well as the pre-filled data. All of those things really helped me understand those kind of transactional workflows on the underwriting and claim side, which are just exceedingly important to make sure, companies can hit their expense and underwriting targets. So I found that to be a really great education, and was fortunate to be able to help inform and build some of the data that fed into those workflows.
So it was kind of a natural step to go from there to the venture community.
Interestingly, I'd say probably wasn't like the most straight line. The thing I was finding, so I'd spent kind of a considerable amount of time with Willis Towers Watson, and then subsequently VeriRisk, which were large organizations, both excellent companies, but ones that I'd say were optimizing for things that were a little different than kind of high-paced growth that you'd find in a startup environment. And I began my career at a growth stage startup company in the Silicon Valley area, RMS, and so that culture and that nature never really left my blood. I really, really enjoyed the innovation and the new development of software, and the business development effort of trying to create an audience for that solution inside the insurance industry. So I was compelled really to focus more on that early stage product orientation. So actually the first step for me after leaving VeriRisk was to found an analytics company. And initially that was really in a research mode, but myself and a co-founder began to kind of work on geospatial analytics. That had gestated for a while in the research mode. And in parallel, I was doing a lot of consulting and advisory work with startups. And that led to an opportunity to explore ways in which I could partner with AmFam Ventures as well. And so I think it was over a breakfast, the conversation shifted from the startup ideas I had to, maybe there was a fit on the investing side, which I hadn't really considered, quite frankly, prior to that. I had always been more in an operating mode. And to a question you brought up earlier, I think that that's something that I try and bring in the way I work with startups today, is to try and bring the empathy and the awareness of what it is to have founders be responsible for payroll, be responsible for operating results, and carrying that weight, as one makes their way through their day. And so, that was really the way I thought of myself. But it turned out that the way the American Family Ventures team orients itself, it does so with a deep level of partnership as an intent. And so, because it was a high touch, high engagement model with founders, that felt like to me that was really aligned with what I enjoy and what I care about. And so it just so turned out that it was a great fit. And I, of course, I knew Dan Reed and the team quite well and had a high degree of trust. And so it was a natural fit, but it wasn't one I sought out. It was one that kind of just organically developed and has been just a fantastic decision. And I found it to be, it turns out, I think it was great preparation, but I'd say not necessarily
not a straight line. Were you having breakfast with Dan Reed that day?
I think I had breakfast at the time with Dan, and then also other folks, the firm at the time, Drew Aldrich, and who kind of collectively, my arm was twisted, to join in, and it was just a great decision. I'm very glad that they presented that opportunity, and thrilled to be a part of the team.
So I want to ask you about the VC environment, 2023. Things are quite different, and I'm talking generally over the InsureTech arm of the VC world. Talking generally in 2023, relative to let's say 2021, things have moved quickly in a very different direction. Talk for a minute about that change and how things are different today and maybe where they're heading.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because, InsureTech is, you could take that from so many different perspectives. So, you could take that from, if I were building a full stack carrier, frame of reference. And so I think what might be different there is there's a wider level of appreciation for the fundamentals of insurance underwriting, the fundamentals of insurance claim management, just the nuts and bolts of running an insurance company, which will be very natural and obvious to most that are come native from the industry. But if you were a crossover investor from the fintech markets or otherwise, those details might not have been as tangible several years ago as they may be today. From our lens, we never really relaxed our attention around those attributes. But I think that there's just a more universal focus on those facets. And if you were to stay on the thread of being an InsureTech carrier, as the slice we're thinking about at the moment, the trick there is to be exceptional at customer acquisition whilst still being great at underwriting, having a differentiated advantage there, and being very expense advantaged around the cost of underwriting and claim management and policy servicing. Doing all that in a space that is large is a very hard formula to solve for. One can do those things in a niche market. Yeah. But to do all of those things in an extremely large market, because we don't have that many segments of the insurance industry that are $100 billion plus lines of premium. And so it's a very difficult thing to get that equation where all of those line up so that as the venture investor, you can see the opportunity for a disproportionately large financial return. And so I see that as being a tricky formula to solve for. faceting in the scale requirement in addition to the excellence on the operating side. But we can continue to look for those opportunities, and that involves us doing so in North America as well as in emerging markets that have a lot of growth potential. And then if you take InsureTech and you move it to a different lens, those companies that are seeking to serve insurance businesses, I think that there are a lot of excellent opportunities there to streamline claim process, support kind of the analytical side of risk management. I think that the facets that we always counsel startups to reflect on is the true objective size of the market that they can serve. And so we tend to get excited about companies that are focused on, for example, more than one line of business, more than one part of the value chain, and sometimes not necessarily more than one geography. That last point is very difficult because insurance is not a global market in most respects. It's a multinational market, so it's very difficult to be successful across multiple countries. But certainly more than one line of business and different places in the value chain. That creates the space for the market size to be big enough if one's a software provider or a data provider to the insurance industry. And so, those are things that we focus on. I think we'll see a lot of great companies that are solving point solutions that generate strong impact for carriers. And I think that there'll need to be some consolidation of those probably to create the large enough scale to produce a very, very large company. But I think that there's great opportunities there, and insurance companies broadly they're really enthusiastic about embracing those technologies in ways today that haven't been as present in the last several years. The readiness is there, I think. So it's a good opportunity to do that. And then there's other spots in the if we were to define InsureTech from a different lens, I think there are new pathways for distribution. Digitally enabled agencies, as an example, that I think have a lot of potential. Right. And if you think about what percentage of premium gets allocated to different parts of different parts of the insurance process, sales, commissions, marketing, that's a disproportionately high amount consistently across multiple lines. And so, a multi-line agency that's digitally enabled can be particularly interesting. And so I think we tend to think a lot about that side as well.
So I'd like to go back to something you said. We had Ellen Carney on with Forrester just the other day, and she was talking about how she believed, and her research shows that somewhere between a 20 and 40% of InsureTechs will not be here. Will either be going away through their, not working out, or through being acquired by others, insurance companies, other InsureTechs. You were saying that
in 2023.
In 2023. And you were saying that you could see companies being acquired or coming together. What do you think about that statement? What is your thought whenever you hear that?
Yeah, it's hard to put the percentages in context. So I'm reflecting on those numbers. I mean, I think that the difficult thing, and so the thing I think that has to be solved for is when pursuing the insurance industry as the end customer. A challenge can be that the market size. The market size is often discovered to be a little bit smaller than originally presented. Sometimes there could be a fairly large gap there. So that's kind of one realization that often occurs for startups. And then the sales cycle can be demonstrated to be longer than was anticipated. When a sale is achieved, it can be a little bit more incremental in revenue growth rather than very large step-ups. And so if you add those three things together, it can create a situation where it requires patience. Mm-hmm. And I think in the last several years, there was enough enthusiasm in the market that some of the fundraising wasn't wasn't grounded in patience. It was somewhat grounded in exuberance. So you would have an environment where expectations and the priming of the business from how it's spending its money and how it's messaging with stakeholders is in one frame of reference, but the reality of the market may be a little different. And so that disconnect can create a point of tension that might result in someone becoming low on cash, or otherwise having kind of less market momentum than was anticipated. And so there might be a need to align different solutions together to try and have a stronger positioning. I think that seems like that could happen. And then also from a venture-backed lens, the founders and the investors in many cases, may still want to, see those companies achieve a higher potential. And so, the combination of two companies, keeps the upside available in some cases, versus, a premature outcome for, a company in isolation. So I think it could be an attractive option. I think that the difficult thing sometimes is, you mentioned carriers acquiring. I think sometimes that the tricky thing there is to just become familiar and aware with companies that might be a good fit. So much of this might be more insular startup to startup interaction or investor to investor interaction, and maybe less awareness on behalf of the insurance company that an acquisition opportunity might be present. And so I think that would probably be, if I were the carrier, I would be thinking about how do I get a lens into where those opportunities are, because I think that could be a little bit more elusive or a little bit harder to find.
I'd like to switch up the subject a little bit and talk about climate.
Sure.
One of the things that we've learned about you is that you're a weatherman.
You're a weather guy.
Who would have known? I thought I knew you. but we've learned through your resume, you're a weatherman. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, literally. You said the two examples. Yeah, I was fortunate to do like about 100 live broadcasts. Yeah, on the cable access stuff. So not very exciting. But I kind of cut my teeth in broadcasting in that regard, because that's what I thought I wanted to do. Because I enjoyed communicating science, and I was just passionate about, violent and extreme weather from a very early age. Later, I basically started to embody some of the characters that you see in the movie Twister. In grad school, I had some aspects of that. There are many, many people who dedicate their lives to that more than I did from a storm chasing perspective. But I had an opportunity to firsthand experience extreme weather in the field as well. And so, that is definitely a component of my background. I would say what I've taken from that is, I've taken from that both a appreciation for, kind of what the insurance industry is serving. How when a catastrophe occurs, when people's lives are disrupted, what is that really, what are we as an insurance industry really trying to do from a value perspective back to individual policyholders and families? And because seeing those things firsthand leave an impression that's very different than an actuarial, maybe analytical point of view. So I'd say that I take that with me. And then also I just observe things being more extreme or more volatile is really the right word. Over the balance of, just the last couple of decades when I've been, kind of very focused on this. And so that is one of the ways in which I think of climate change is just, substantially more volatility. And so as a result, we see a lot of unexpected unexpected risks, unexpected outcomes. And so I try and where I can find interesting ways to intersect our investing activity and the climate environment.
Is that something whenever it's time to either you're being asked to invest in that or find companies, is that kind of your thing They'll go to you and say, hey, this is a climate, this is a weather, this is something, even analytics associated with weather, go Kyle. Is that how that works?
That is an area I get pulled into. I'll get pulled into a lot of other areas as well. But that is one. I would say the tricky thing is it's sometimes hard to have a really big business if what you're trying to do is say climate in 10 years is going to be worse. Like that. Yeah. That's interesting data point, not as actionable. So we tend to focus on things where it's the application of that knowledge to a business problem. Or another lens would be, is there a way in which a current industry practice can be transformed with technology? And in doing so, can it also be carbon negative? Mm-hmm. And so we'll look at, new construction materials, or we'll look at ways in which, the nature or vegetation can be managed. We'll look at these kinds of businesses that can be transformed with technology and can, by virtue of what they're doing, change the climate equation. But it's not by itself a climate analytic, company. It's not a risk index, so to speak. Instead, it's an application that has a climate overlay. That said, I'd say we do get very focused on insurance company catastrophe analytic businesses as well. So if we see great solutions to underwrite wildfire and flood risk differently, we're always interested in understanding those opportunities, because it's only going to get more and more extreme in terms of the challenge of underwriting those kind of natural hazards effectively. So we pay a lot of attention to that.
Do you think that what's your opinion of the climate progression that we're currently in? Like, I live in California, Northern California, and it's raining again. It's crazy. I mean, we were in a significant drought, and now we're in the opposite. Now we're in the tropics. And so give us some, from an educated standpoint, your thoughts on climate.
Well, my general perception is just that, if we had a certain degree of variability and sensible weather day to day, 20 years ago, that variability has gone up meaningfully. And so what's the result of that? The result isn't that we're just a little bit more uncomfortable in a given time. Instead, what it means is, like, if you're in California, if the variability goes substantially up in terms of, for example, snowpack, in one year you might have, substantial snowpack, but in many cases there's insufficient snowpack to generate the amount of total water capacity that the state might need. And so it creates stresses on systems that are designed around averages rather than designed around extremes. And then the same could be true if you were to look at, the examples in, Texas, or, the central part of the country around their kind of response to extreme cold. You get the same situation where the infrastructure has been more designed around kind of, smaller volatility average cases. If we get extreme cold, we can have situations where you have, grid collapse. And so I think in general, our infrastructure is insufficiently prepared for these levels of extremes. And so when I think about climate, I get really interested in the infrastructure layer. I get really interested in the large scale adaptation, which will frequently come through hard infrastructure solutions rather than risk or software solutions, because I think that's kind of where really the rubber meets the road from a problem standpoint. I think we need to see massive upgrades in infrastructure to be prepared to survive through these more volatile states, because it's not just a departure from comfort. I think it can have a true detrimental effect to individual lives.
Right. I was watching a program last night to do with, all this weather that we're getting here in California. And one of the statements that was made was that there's as much water running off back into the ocean, uncaptured, if you will, that could fill Lake Mead and Lake Powell, which, as we all know, are are desperately low on capacity right now, or low levels. And the scientists that they were interviewing said, yes, that's true. We just don't have the infrastructure to deal with capturing that, right? If we could capture that water, that'd be great. Capture it and then send it to Lake Mead and fill Lake Mead, that'd be great. But those kind of solutions aren't in place because we haven't invested properly to put those into place in this new world where we have to make hay when the sun is shining, if you will, right? Get the water when you can because we're used to the average, or we're still hoping for the average, and the average may be gone.
And infrastructure projects take a long time and
expensive.
And I'd say the underlying climate attributes here that we experience daily as weather, that is changing at a pace. And in some ways, the local effect is hard to predict. So it's hard to say the infrastructure we need for the next 30 or 40 years is the following, so we can start building it now. So I think that what's going to be necessary is to have, a more nimble way of dealing with these issues. Kind of very long-term, multi-decadal scale infrastructure projects are going to be very difficult to do right. And so that just seems like, to me, that's going to be a required shift in thinking. So I think there'll be a very large business opportunity as it relates to climate adaptation and shifts in infrastructure. So that's the area I get really excited about, which is it indirectly to the benefit of the insurance industry.
So, are you still a weather nerd? That's the key question.
Yes, although you definitely hear my wife and others say that I'm not the best weather forecaster. It was always a good research.
Yeah, they all revel in that, right? That's great stuff.
Yeah,
when Cal gets it wrong, ha ha ha.
Yeah, you always get the question, "What's the weather going to be like tomorrow?" And I'll generally say, "I don't know. I haven't looked. I'm not that kind of person." But I definitely feel like I can understand what's going on. The really interesting thing is when I joined RMS, and I was so fortunate to be a part of that company in the very early 2000s. I had the opportunity to work on all kinds of natural hazards, industrial fire, pandemics, other forms of man-made risks like terrorism, earthquakes, other geotechnical issues like liquefaction. And so, to me, weather and climate was a door into a whole host of kind of environmental and man-made extremes. And that was just fortunate that was a lens into reinsurance, which was subsequently a lens into underwriting and claims. And so, day to day, I'd say it's something I don't get to exercise a lot. I focus more on, software businesses or, different forms of, kind of InsureTech. But it's an area that absolutely I'm very passionate about. And particularly I'm passionate about, drawing down carbon, in aggregate. And ways to just try and help support those who get displaced, because there's an awful lot of climate refugees presently, and there will be in the future. So that's definitely a passion kind of project.
No question. And I'll speak for myself as a human being. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Agree.
But you mentioned you said exercise.
Yeah,
we can't let you go without talking about exercise.
Sure.
Because now I have the two probably biggest exercise nerds I know, Lee Boyd.
Nerd. Another reference to nerd? And
Kyle Beatty, both on the same screen that I'm looking at. So you're a runner, but not a lifelong runner. You made yourself into a runner. That's kind of the Lee Boyd story.
Yeah. Tell us about yours. What made you decide to start running?
I was like ultimate couch potato growing up. I was the video game kid. But this is to tie it back to weather. I was in a field experiment in grad school where we were out in the middle of Western Kansas, and our job was to find, tornadoes or other things like that. And if you have that job, you watch the movie Twister, it's exciting.
Yeah.
in practice, 99% of the time, you're staring at a blue sky, waiting for something interesting to happen. And so what I was just a professor that was part of the program turned me on to running in all this downtime. And so I kind of caught the bug and just had this bucket list of wanting to get to longer and longer distances.
Okay.
And then after talking about it for a while, it became something I was like, I probably ought to actually do this. And so started to try and ramp up and figure out, how to avoid injury and whatnot. And the pandemic was really a great, kind of great giver of time. I've spent about half of my working days, for many years traveling. And so it was great to get that time back. And I just channeled a lot of that into training. And so I've been fortunate to do about a half dozen marathons in the last few years. And
that's amazing.
And the first ultra, which was,
which
fun.
ultra? Which one?
This is called Crown King in Arizona.
Okay.
So it's kind of up a mountain, and which sounds more dramatic than it was, because there's a fair amount of walking involved in that. But it was just a great,
ultras are far.
Great surreal experience, and so I've just found joy in pushing myself. And I'd say, like, in general, like a mode I have is I really like challenging myself to achieve new goals. I'm a very goal-oriented person. And so, right now I'm on a quest to finish all the Abbott, kind of world majors. And,
goodness.
So working on that. And, along the way, I've gotten really into different forms of health optimization and health span kind of.
Okay.
So I spend a lot of time thinking about nutrition and all that as well.
That's fantastic. Which major is next? What are you shooting for now?
In March, I'm going to be participating in Tokyo. So I'm excited about that.
That's amazing.
And then Chicago.
You've already done Boston, right?
I did twice.
Okay.
And I have to caveat this. I'm not a qualifier.
Okay.
But
you found your way in. Way in.
Yeah. So I don't want to oversell my abilities here, but it's
your 3 hour pace.
Really great experience. And so, I get a chance to do Tokyo in March, Chicago in the fall, and then I'll get London done the year after. And
that's amazing.
Round it out.
That's amazing. I assume those goals, all this time you're able to bring that back into your work. I run a lot, and I use it as thinking. I use it as brainstorming. I assume you do the same. And then you're goal oriented, which would have to also reflect in your work. Yeah.
I think it's absolutely, I try and set, kind of big, difficult goals. I tend to be really methodically disciplined, which it kind of takes to get up every day and train and log 1,000 miles a year, what have you, running. And then it is almost meditative, running is, has that, it's very clarifying. So I value that, and just hope my knees can allow me to do that.
They'll allow you. What about triathlons? You got triathlons on the radar?
I need to learn how
after the majors
to pull that off, but it'll be on the bucket list for the next 5 to 10 years. I'll try and do that.
Good for you.
Lee, you have a few marathons under your belt, don't you?
I do. I've done. I don't do the marathons anymore. I guess I could, but now I focus on the 5Ks, 10Ks, things like that now. Triathlons mostly.
That's awesome. Yeah, triathlons mostly is impressive. So
they're fun.
Well done.
They're fun.
Yeah. I'll have another beer, please.
They serve those at the finish line, Rob.
No, but you listen to Peter Attia. We talked about this.
I do. Guy. Yeah. No, I'm super into health optimization from those lenses, and for me, where that fits in is just I'm analytical by nature. I think my team will always kind of say that I'm one of the most analytical people that they will interact with day to day, and so that shows itself in my thought processes from a investment perspective, but it also kind of reveals itself in terms of how I think about exercise, diet, supplementation, all of those things. And I'm pretty I'm pretty adamant that, I'm on a quest to live to be 150, and people kind of think that's crazy to say, and it probably is a little bit extreme.
We were talking to somebody the other day who said that it's predicted that whoever's going to live to 200 first is alive today.
Yeah, and the reason I use that, like, I use it as a mental framing, and the reason why I say that is, to me, I'm in my mid 40s. There's a lot of people in their mid 40s who have kind of just accepted, that they're not going to accomplish, kind of substantial new things that they haven't already tried. And my view is, if you have a frame of reference that you have, if you're in your mid 40s, you've got 75 healthy years ahead. There's so much one can do. And so I use it as a frame of reference just to push myself to embrace new things, try and live as a rookie, trying new things, and not seeing it as though, I'm kind of over any hill, but that I'm just starting out, and I'm fortunate to be a little wiser than I used to be, and I can maybe be a little more disciplined going after something new. So that it's more a mindset for me than anything, but I do definitely try and do what I can to enjoy my journey and not feel like I'm saddled by any kind of health issues if they're avoidable.
That's wonderful. I love that.
And so you do all you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we are so thrilled that we had you on, and all the way from Amherst. Honored to have another member of the AmFam Venture team join us, and would love to have you come back again.
Yeah, I would love to do it. Thank you, guys.
Maybe after London.
Yeah.
Sounds
I'm fine
good.
after Tokyo. Yeah.
Okay, after Tokyo. That's fine. But you've done Tokyo before, haven't you?
No. This will be the first time, and I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be a blast.
That'll be amazing.
Well, we will say sayonara until the next time we have you on. And thank you very much for joining us, and look forward to seeing you out and about at industry events.
Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it.
Thanks for being on, Kyle.
I knew when I met Kyle at Property Information Report Conference, National Conference.
Hunted him down.
When I
Trapped him in the corner.
Stalked him and handcuffed him and made him talk to me.
Yeah.
That he would be a great guest.
He was a great guest.
He's a great guest. Very interesting man.
I agree. I love it when we have people who are dedicated to their life's mission. Let it be his work with investments, or let it be bettering himself, his longevity. I love that.
He wants to live to be 150.
I think that's a quote. That's a quote that we'll probably stick with, because he had a great thought. It was, if I have the mindset that I'm going to live to be 140, I have 75 years left of great life. It's not I'm halfway done because I'm only living to 80, right? What a neat way to look at life.
You have to have a good attitude, man.
You have to have a good attitude. He's a very positive person.
Very positive and super smart, and a weatherman.
Yeah.
We thank him for being with us today. You're awesome, Kyle. Look forward to seeing you next time. And thanks to all you for being here with us today, and to Al and Alicia for your help. And until next time.
Goodbye, everybody.